Yeah, and it will be interesting, Xolani, to see whether there's going to be a slight ideological shift as well from the minister's budget, from the minister's medium-term budget policy statement when he announced it a bit later on. Remember the conversation that we had with Vili Okamp, who's the spokesperson for the Democratic Alliance. He said that, listen, we have made some submissions to the minister, which also, you may have seen some of those, which are in the manifesto of the Democratic Alliance, and we have to wait and see whether or not any of those will be taken into consideration. But as you've said, that Dr. Nthabiseng Moleko is now joining us from the Stellenbosch Business School to speak about some of the expectations. And you have what you call the rule of three. A very good afternoon.
A very good afternoon, and thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. Speak to us about the rule of three. How do you think this could work?
Well, the first thing is this. Today we're going to hear about fiscal consolidation, we're going to hear about the fiscal position of the government, and we're going to hear how the Minister of Finance is going to allocate the revenue collected thus far by our SARS Commissioner and the entities of the state through the revenue authorities, and how this will be dispersed from February budget. And we're going to get a sense of, are we collecting sufficiently? So the first thing that South Africans probably need to be allayed to is that the number on revenue is very much linked to growth. If we're not growing as a country, if we're not growing as an economy, we're not able to collect revenue, whether it's from value-added tax, whether it's from PAYE, from income tax, and whether it's from corporate income tax and some of the custom duty collections. So the biggest issue today, we should want to hear about how are we going to enhance output and how are we going to enhance productivity, which is constrained, and how are we going to ensure that the things that are hindering our ability to grow and widen that output are actually dealt with so that we can grow and have more revenue. I do know that today we will hear a lot about fiscal consolidation. We will hear about the primary surplus. In the last budget, we saw the first report of the primary surplus. What this means primarily is that we are spending less than we are actually collecting for the first time. So we have a primary surplus. So our revenue is exceeding our expenditure. So we're cutting costs on all of our allocations in terms of the budget. I think the second thing, Eldrin, that I want to talk to you about is the issue of the consolidation and the coherence amongst the economic cluster, amongst the state and its agencies, not just National Treasury, but actually the Reserve Bank, but actually looking at all the cluster governments, whether you're looking at Department of Agriculture, Mineral Resources, Department of Trade, Industry and Competition, and its agencies. Are these institutions working in collaboration, particularly from the point of using public procurement, particularly from using the point of how do we enhance SMME contribution and localization to kickstart productivity and to get that growth happening using our own internal instruments. It doesn't always have to be outsiders coming in to invest. We actually have to look locally at the instruments that we have. I think the last point that I want to make on the three is looking at the issue of gross fixed capital formation. Both business and also the state invest in infrastructure. These are key drivers to growth. We know that infrastructure is one of the underpinning, we call it marginal productivity of capital. It drives out your growth quicker. You are able to grow quicker if you have roads, if you have telecoms infrastructure, if you have ports that are functioning. And the question here is the management of those entities, but also ensuring that they're aligned to the greater goal of ensuring that we have greater growth so that we can employ more people, so that we can actually deal with inequality and the underdevelopment woes across these provinces and nodes where we haven't seen growth.
Yeah, and speaking about the issue around unemployment, if you look at the NDP, for instance, the target was that by 2020, our unemployment rate should be at 14%. But in 2021, what we saw was a record high at 35.3% unemployment. And now with the last Q2 stats that came out is at 33.5%. And I wonder how the state then looks at the unemployment crisis and says that considering the various sectors that we have, what sort of intervention is required to ensure that those sectors are able to absorb the labor so that we deal with this issue of long-term unemployment where you find people have not worked for more than 12 years?
Actually, longer than that. There's people that have never worked. In our economy, we have what we call chronic unemployment. So it's not just a systemic issue, it's actually a structural issue. our economy is growing in such a way that mineral, financial services, and also your services sector are largely the ones that have expanded over the last 2 decades. And what we have seen is that the employment intensity, i.e. the ability of these sectors to absorb not just the unskilled, but those who are what we call semi-skilled. Maybe you have a matric, maybe you haven't gone to a technical and vocational education and training facility, but you have some ability to do something. They don't want necessarily those type of skills. So there's a mismatch in the labor market in terms of the demand and what is being supplied. The issue here is the labor absorptive sectors, which are the drivers also of output in most countries, and globally we have seen how China and India, particularly India, is growing at over 7% this year. It's because of your subsectors, including BPO sectors, which is one of the services, but it's agriculture, it's diversifying your manufacturing, it's making sure that these labor absorptive sectors are cost competitive. How do you make them cost competitive? It's not by lowering your incentives. Companies on their own don't just grow. Many of them have reduced costs because the state subsidizes the input, whether it's electricity, whether it's the tariffs, whether it's all the non-financial constraints, even providing cheap finance through DFIs or development finance institutions so that you can massify the number of local industries and the expansion of value chains, both downstream and upstream. So I think that unemployment needs a very deliberate and cohesive approach from the state. We are sitting at 12.5 million unemployed. We are sitting with over 3 million in what we call discouraged work seekers. We are sitting with nodes in provinces where there are, I'd say, more than 5 or 6 out of the 9 provinces have more than 50% expanded unemployment. You talk 33. Unemployment is at 42 to 44%. Depending on whether you're youth, woman, or black, it can go up to 60. So we are sitting on a ticking time bomb. And if we don't deal with this deliberately through the economic cluster with the participation of the private sector and all the agencies of the state in a cohesive way, we are going to have a problem. Socially, we have crime out of control. Yeah. Socially, we have, I believe, one of the factors that drives social conditions that create anger and that create unrest and lack of dignity, leading to things like gender-based violence. And that's not the only cause, but it definitely is as a driver because of the social conditions that people are living under. So unemployment has got to be everyone's problem in this budget, also in the clusters of the economy going forward, but together with the private and the public sector, a solution must be found.
Dr. Nthabiseng, Moleko, thank you so much for your time. And of course, you will be with us throughout the day as we build up to the medium-term budget policy.